Hello everyone, my name's Robin Jennings. I'm a pipe organ builder and harpsichord maker based down in Dorset in the southwest of England. And I've been doing this for a very long time, since I left school, and I thought it was about time that I shared some of what I do and might interest a few people, you never know. I'm going to flash up a few images of some instruments that I've made in the past. For those of you who aren't aware what I do, and I'm going to start a process of recording, making a small chamber organ from scratch. I'm hoping it's going to be interesting to some of you. We're going to go through various stages of making the keyboard, the Windchest, the wooden pipes, and everything involved, the casework obviously, in making a chamber organ or a small pipe organ. I'm one of the very, very few people, certainly in Europe, who specialises in making these type of instruments. So it's a very, very niche market, but hopefully it might be interesting to some of you. And I hope you're going to come along with the ride. I've never done this before, no idea how it's going to turn out, but let's see how it goes. And thank you for watching. Okay, let's start with a piece of wood. This is what I call Scandinavian Redwood, otherwise known as Baltic pine, sometimes Scots pine. Its Latin name is Pinus sylvestris. It's used predominantly in the joinery trade for doors and windows, etc. Very stable and very economical by comparison to other timbers. It's all relative, but it's still horrendously expensive. But it's very, very useful and very, perfect for making organ parts, especially wooden pipes and the internal parts of the organ. So we're starting by ripping down these pieces for the grid ends and the grid sides, the grid being the distributor really. I'll explain it later what the grid is as part of the Windchest. The Windchest is basically the engine room of the organ, where it houses the wind generated from an electric blower and distributes it to the various pipes via the keyboard and action, and we'll get into that later in more depth. This is a three-phase bandsaw. The red box is a phase converter. I don't have three-phase in the workshop, so this phase converter converts my single phase into three phases, works well. Constantly looking for the best, trying to get the best out of this wood. It can be quite knotty and splitty, you have to be very careful. So I'm constantly summing it up as you saw it. More knots appear and you have to just work around them. I'll sometimes cut the knots out and plug them, but generally speaking they're pretty secure and they can be either patched or sized over with glue, stop them leaking. What you don't want in an organ is for the wind to escape into next door chambers or whatever, and then you start getting runnings and things going on that you really don't want. Two notes speaking at once. Using a push stick, keeping your fingers away from the blade. Constantly having to think about safety. You have to use your imagination as what could happen if you just lose your concentration for a second. These machines aren't very forgiving. So just finishing up ripping these bits, and then we'll move on to the planer. Check the measurements. And here we are on the planer. This is a 12-inch planer, and what we do, this is actually a combination machine, so that it does the surface and the thickness. So you'll see in a minute as I flip the table up. So I always start with the surface, the largest edge first. I always love this process, turning a rough piece of timber into something usable. It's just so easy with this machine. You want to put pressure on the far bed so that you get a nice flat surface. So I'm always pushing down on the far end of the machine. So once you've done the surface, you flip it 90 degrees and put an edge on it. Then you've got a face and an edge, which I'll mark, and then I will use that as a reference when I thickness it. So that done, now we move on to the thicknesser. So it's just a case of flipping the table up and winding the bed up. Now this is a combination machine. I don't have the luxury of having two machines. It would be nice, but I don't have the space. So the only slight inconvenience is having to wind the table up every time you switch over, but that's really not a problem. So I've got a digital readout which you can't see here. So taking about 2mm off at a time. Got a nice slow feed on this to get a better surface, better finish. It's not a conventional cutter block with parallel knives. It has a spiral block which has lots of separate tungsten carbide tipped cutters. There they are. It's more economical. You don't have to keep changing the blades and sharpening. These are disposable, but they have 4 edges on them, so you flip them around 90 degrees and you've got 4 bites of the cherry, as it were, and then you change them. Definitely more economical than having to sharpen blades every 3 months or so. These can one edge on these small cutters can last up to a year, because they're not high-speed steel, they're tungsten carbide, which is much harder, lasts longer. So I just think, finishing off the thickness, these are the, as I say, the grid ends and sides, and then we'll move on to cutting to length and making the frame. So onto the panel saw. This is my workhorse. I do so much on this machine. It's absolutely fabulous. It's got a sliding table for cross cutting, and you can also use it as a ripping blade, but I do most of my large ripping on the bandsaw. It's better kitted, it's better suited for that, and the timber doesn't warm up, doesn't heat up so much. So I cut one end, it's called a social cut, and then the second cut cuts it to length, the exact length you want. These are slightly over length, but you'll see why in a minute. So just over 12-inch blade on this. It just eats through this pine effortlessly. So there are the ends, and I've got the sides to do as well. Constantly checking where the knots are, trying to avoid the knots. There's a fair amount of waste involved with this timber, but that's part of the course really with this timber. The waste will keep me warm during the winter. Right, now I'm going to join the two, what I call the front and the back of the grid. So the back being where the player stands, and the front is where the facade pipes are. I'll join these two bits together, and then we can start cutting the slots for the grid. This is probably the second most used machine in the shop, the pillar drill. If you're an organ builder, then you know how to drill holes. I did have a nasty accident on this machine a few years ago, where my sleeve got caught in a cutting blade and dragged my wrist into the blade and made a bit of a mess. Let's just say there was a lot of blood and a lot of time off. So I'm very aware, I know where there's smock with Velcro cuffs on them, so that no chance of that happening again. You can get guards for these, but they just guard the chuck. They don't actually, you can't guard the blade because that has to be exposed to do its work. So I just find it's the guard for the chuck rather unnecessary and just gets in the way. But I know probably I should use it, but I'm very wary of this machine now after what happened. Huge respect. So now we're going to screw these two pieces together, and you'll see why in a minute. Just working out the best way. Okay, now this is why these bits of wood are slightly over length, because I'll screw the screw hole will be cut off once the slots are cut. So it's sacrificial ends. This impact drill I got quite recently. I use it all the time now. It's you have to be quite careful. If you kept pressing the trigger, that screw would just keep going and going and going. It's incredibly powerful. Very, very useful tool. Right, back to the panel saw. Now we're going to cut the slots for the grid. I've made this jig which clamps to the sliding fence, and we'll start cutting the slots for the bars being the separators, separating the notes within the grid. There's just a metal dowel which you move on one at a time, and it's incredibly accurate, same every time. Just have to take your time. And these are the blades that I use. They're called dado blades. So you've got a spacer in the middle. You can space the two blades to make whatever thickness cut you want. This is, I've got two blades doing just over 6mm slot, which will take the 6mm thick bars. And there's a piece, if you see just beyond to the right, there's an extra piece of ply which sits on the outfeed, on the far table, which just supports the piece as it moves on. So that's the last one, I think. One more. And there we have it. Bob's your uncle. You can see, get a wonderful quality finish with these blades, and then incredibly uniform gaps, which is ideal. On to joining up the frame now with simple housing joints. Yes, excuse the out of focus. I haven't got quite used to the camera yet, but you see on the right hand side the one that is in focus. It's a simple housing joint. And what I did is cut an extra slot either end to take the ends, take the joints, and then we'll join it up using sash cramps. This is Titebond original glue if anyone's interested. I use it for pretty much everything. It's an excellent general purpose wood glue. So now we've got to make sure that this is square. So what I do is just use a piece of wood with a nail in the end of it, and one end, and a mark at the other end. So we just check the diagonals, and if the diagonals are equal, then you know that it's square. Better than using a square, because you can have a slight bit of warpage in the timber that wouldn't give you an accurate reading on the square. With this, you know the diagonals are equal, you've got square corners. Let's check both ends, or both diagonals. Then it's on to putting the bars in. Now, this is probably quite controversial of the purists. I'm using MDF here because A, it's very stable, B, it's never going to split, and what you really don't want is for the bars to split. If they split, then you get runnings in between notes. So if you press one note down, for instance, the next note will play because you've got the bar is leaking wind through to the next note. With the MDF, that's never going to happen, and it's something I've been doing for a while now, and it works very, very well. So it's a bit tedious this, but you just take your time and make sure you've got a nice bead of glue. These fit perfectly because I set up the dado blades exactly the right size, so you've got a nice interference fit for the bars to slot into. So once we've done that, we put the spacers in. Now these spacers, they do two things. They give you equal spaces between the bars, and also they give you a bit of timber to take the pins for the end of the pallets, which we'll see later when we fit the pallets. And there it is, ready to be planed flat. Now, how I do this is with a router and a sled really. It's a wonderful system. The traditional way is to use a large plane, and that's how I was taught to do it. But this is a lot quicker, and it's a fail-safe way of making sure you've got a flat surface throughout. So you've got quite a chunky inch cutter here. You just go moving backwards and forwards, one bar at a time. Bit messy, that's why I've got the full PPE on. And then once I've done this, I'll flip it over and do the other side. So you can see the finish you get with the router is excellent. What I'll do is probably just go with a block of sandpaper, take any slight discrepancies out. There shouldn't be anything. Now, what I haven't filmed here is gluing on the pallet table, I call it. It's a 4mm piece of MDF, which I've put in the press. It's a vacuum press. I will show that later on when we do the other side, but for now what I'm doing is routing out the slots for the pallet. The pallet being the valve that is connected to the keyboard, basically, so the keys are resting on top of the pallets in this system, where when you press a key, it'll be joined by a sticker or a piece of tracker, a piece of dowel that will push the pallet open and let the wind through to that piece, that individual grid, and then distribute the wind accordingly, depending on what stop you've got pulled out. This will all become apparent if you don't know how an organ works. Hopefully this will become apparent as we move on to the next bits of the Windchest. But this is just a cutter with a bearing on it. So I've cut some holes to take the cutter, and then the bearing just runs along the side of the grids of the bars. And there it is. Then we move on to drilling the holes for what I call the stickers, which are like the trackers. They're vertical bits of dowel with brass pins or rods on the end of them, and that will be connected on one end, the keys, and the other end will go through the grid down onto the pallets. This will all become apparent the further we go with the system, the process. So we've done one side, then we'll flip it over and do the other side, because you're never going to get a 2mm drill that's going to, well, A, won't be that long, and B, won't wander. So you go from both ends, and then you cut out the clearance. Which we'll see in a minute. So now what I'm doing on the saw now is cutting out the clearance. You want as little friction as possible on your fingertips. So the piece of brass that will be going through this grid, it'll be about a 1.6mm piece of rod, will go through the grid and down onto the pallet. So I'm going to cut away 2/3 of the material to stop, well, to minimise the friction. So then moving on, thickness of the blade. Hopefully I have a bit of more close-up in a minute to show exactly what I'm doing. There we go. So you just keep turning it over, do one cut, turn it over, do the same cut, then move the blade, move the fence, another thickness, blade thickness, and the last one. So now you've got a nice channel of mid-air which won't produce any friction, so the rod will go through one hole and down like this through to the other one. And there's a mock-up of the sticker with the bit of brass, fossil bronze or brass on the end of it. And there's the grid finished with the slides ready to be drilled. So that's the next process. I hope you'll join me for the next process, which will be making the upper boards for where the pipes sit. Thank you for watching.